Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex sources, strip away the noise, and give you the foundational knowledge you need fast.
Today, we are taking a really fascinating and deep cultural journey into the heart of the Himalayas. We're diving into the history and enduring identity of a people known globally for their resilience, their courage, and martial prowess.
But whose internal life is just so rich with ancient complexity and spiritual tradition. We're talking about the Gurung people, or as they actually prefer to be called, the Tamu.
That's right. For so many people outside of South Asia, the word Gurung is almost completely synonymous with the legendary Gurkha soldier.
Yeah, it's this image forged on battlefields all over the world. But that external image, as important as it is, it really only tells a tiny, tiny sliver of the actual story.
And our sources for this are just fantastic. We've got a blend of anthropological studies, deep cultural preservation documents, some from diaspora groups like Tamu Parawar in New York, and some really cutting-edge academic work.
Specifically, that recent DNA-based research, which has just completely rewritten their history.
It's amazing. So our mission today is to zoom in on that internal culture. We're going to trace their origins, which is, it's one of those rare stories where ancient myth and modern science collide and actually confirm one another.
And we'll get into their sophisticated social architecture, their layered spiritual world. We'll look at their vibrant traditional attire. And then finally, we have to analyze the economic engine that's driven this community globally.
That enduring legacy of military service and, how they're navigate of all the challenges of modernization today.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we need to start with context because the geography of the Gurung people seems to dictate so much of their identity and their history. Where exactly do they call home in Nepal?
Well, the Gurung are primarily recognized as a Tibetan ethnic group. Their homeland is nestled high in the hills and mountains of western central Nepal. Specifically, it's within what is now called Gandaki province. Their traditional domain, it stretches across several key districts, from Gorkha in the east, through Lamjung, Kasiski, and down to Sangja. That whole area is their historical anchor point.
And within Nepal itself, how prominent are they? Are they spread out pretty thinly, or do they form a real demographic pillar in that region?
They form a key linguistic and cultural pillar. So the total number of Gurung speakers in Nepal, according to the 2011 census, was around 325,622.
Which is only about 2% of the whole national population, right?
Exactly. But that number is really misleading. You have to look at their concentration. They are not at all evenly distributed, which is precisely why they've been able to maintain such a distinct and resilient culture.
So where do they really dominate then?
In their traditional homeland, Gandaki province, they make up 11.4% of the entire provincial population. But when you zoom into specific districts, the numbers just jump dramatically.
Like where?
Well, look at a place like Manang district. Gurungs account for 57.1% of the population there.
Over half.
Yeah. And in Lamjung, it's 31.4%, and in Kasekski, it's 29.3%. So they are the undeniable anchor population in that mountain region, and that creates the critical mass you need for cultural and especially linguistic preservation.
That strong regional base must be absolutely key, especially when you consider the linguistic divide in Nepal.
It is absolutely crucial. The Gurung language, which they call Tamuki or Tamu Baba, it belongs to the Sino-Tibetan language family.
Which is a completely different branch from the official language.
A completely different lineage. Nepal's official language, Nepali, is an Indo-European language. So the Sino-Tibetan heritage is really the first major clue that their history is firmly, firmly rooted in the northern reaches of Asia.
And that northern origin, plus their global reputation, has obviously ensured an international presence too. We all know about the Gorkha connection, but when we talk about the diaspora today, how far-reaching are these Tamu communities?
They're truly global. Beyond Nepal, the language is spoken in little pockets of India and Bhutan. But the diaspora is economically and culturally just so significant. You find these established communities in Singapore and Hong Kong.
And in the West.
And very large communities in the West. The United Kingdom, for example, is estimated to have around 75,000 Gurungs.
Which is largely due to those policy changes for former British Army soldiers, right?
Exactly, post-1999. And in the United States, the population is around 17,000. So this global mobility, it's an absolutely essential part of the modern Gurung story.
Let's move now to identity and history. We've established the two names, Gurung, which is what most of us hear, and Tamu, which is what they call themselves. Can you elaborate on the significance of that? of the endonym.
Yeah, the term Gurung is an exonym. It's a name that was applied to them from the outside, mainly by the Nepali state administration and other ethnic groups. But when you speak to the people themselves, they identify as Tamu. And historically, this difference in names, it really speaks volumes about the tension between how you see yourself and an identity that's been imposed on you.
So using Tamu is a way of acknowledging their own indigenous culture.
Precisely. It's a culture that's distinct from the administrative categories they were, well, frankly, forced into.
And does the traditional etymology of the exonym, of Gurung, does that align with their own ancient memory?
Interestingly, yes, it actually reinforces the migration story. So according to their oral tradition, the name Gurung is derived from the Tibetan word grugu.
Grugu, what does that mean?
It literally means to bring down, and that powerful verb, to bring down, it just perfectly captures their fundamental oral tradition that they migrated south, bringing their culture down from the high Tibetan plateau to settle on the lower slopes of the Himalayas.
So their oral history is crystal clear about these northern high-altitude origins. But I found it deeply interesting that for centuries, the legal and political narrative in Nepal actually tried to push a totally different story.
A southern Hindu-aligned origin story.
Exactly. Why did the Shah rulers, particularly in the 15th century and then formalized later, try so hard to manufacture a completely different past for the Gurungs?
Well, that attempt wasn't really about historical accuracy at all. It was about political control and social hierarchy. The state needed a way to slot them into the existing orthodox Hindu structure.
So in the 1855 Muluki'in, the legal code, they were just assigned a place.
They were assigned a place within the caste system, exactly. This forced classification imposed what's been called a divisive hierarchical genealogy, and it often implied some sort of origin tied to Hindu territories further south.
The so-called Charjata and Sorajata classifications.
Right. By trying to slot them into the Charjata, or 4 upper castes, and the Sorajata, or 16 lower castes, the state was trying to define them within a totally foreign framework. And that was essential for maintaining the Hindu elite's power structure.
But the sources we have today show that modern scientific investigation, specifically DNA analysis, just comes along and blows that political fabrication right out of the water.
It's one of the most exciting convergences in all our sources. We're drawing from this fantastic research, including a doctoral thesis by Tek Bahadur Gurung from Sichuan University in China.
Right.
And this DNA analysis was designed to pinpoint their ancient homeland. And it definitively traces the origins of the Tamumai Gurungs back to the Kaing people in Qinghai, China.
Qinghai. I mean, that is geographically massive. It pushes their origins thousands of miles north and thousands of years earlier than the Nepali political narrative ever suggested.
Completely. And the specific DNA evidence just supports this enormous northern migration framework. The study identified a very specific triangular zone as the cradle of the Tamumai Gurungs.
And that zone is where?
It's the area around Kokonor, which is near the upper Yellow River, the Loka area, and then parts of southwest China. The ancestry composition they analyzed showed markers that are just startlingly specific.
So tell us those percentages again. What did they find?
Okay, so they saw 26.63% Mongolian DNA.
Wow.
0.14.9% Tibetan DNA, and 34.3% Naxi DNA. This blend of northern Asiatic markers, especially the Mongolian and Tibetan, it strongly confirms that this group originated in the north.
And moves south along what they call the Tibetan-Yi corridor.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just scientific data, it's a validation of their collective memory.
This is the best part.
It's the most powerful takeaway. The research concluded that the original village area is likely located right around Kokonor, which their ancient oral mythology remembers as, get this, Kokoli Marsho. Yes. A place name recalled in an oral myth passed down for millennia, and it aligns perfectly with a scientifically identified geographic origin point 8,000 years later. It just bridges that gap between science and spiritual memory.
Let's detail that massive timeline now.
Yeah.
I mean, tracing that journey from Qinghai all the way down to present-day Nepal. What was the chronological route of this huge migration?
We are talking deep history. Their primeval ancestors started migrating southwards from the upper reaches of the Yellow River around 8,000 years ago.
8,000.
Yeah. They were essentially following the path of early human movements in Asia.
So that's the first major stop. Where did they land next and when?
After centuries of movement, they reached the area that we now call Yunnan in southwest China, and that was about 6,000 years ago. This is a major hub for Sino-Tibetan languages and culture.
And then the final push into the high Himalayas?
So they reached the Tibet-Loka area, which is also known as Shannan, sometime before 100 BC. And then the final definitive leg of the journey that brought them into present-day Nepal occurred more than 2,000 years ago.
And based on the archaeology, they most likely settled at a specific site first.
Right. The ancient site of Kola, likely before the beginning of the Common Era, or AD.
So, having traced them 8,000 years back to Kokonor, where do we see the first physical settled proof of their identity in Nepal? That brings us to this site, Kola. It sounds like a kind of ancient ethno-historical center.
Kola is critically important. It's not just some village, it's a large ancient site, and it's nestled way up in the high forest northeast of Pokhara. Archaeologists estimate it was occupied between 1000 and 1300 AD.
So about 300 years of dense collective occupation.
Exactly, and its significance to the Gurung identity today goes way beyond just being an old settlement. It is considered the earliest known collective village of the Tamumai ancestors before they all dispersed to lower elevations across the hills.
But it's also inscribed in their spiritual DNA, you said.
It is. The site and all the routes around it, they figure prominently in their sacred oral texts, which they call pai.
These are the texts that are recited by the traditional priests.
That's right. And specifically, the Lemikon Rompai is an oral text that speaks of the route of their ancestors' migration. Kola is the spiritual, ethno-historical center of their arrival. It's the place where their physical presence and their spiritual stories first settled on the southern side of the Himalayas. Understanding Kola is absolutely essential to understanding the Gurung sense of belonging.
So if that movement and settlement were the foundation, then the Gurung people immediately started building a really complex social architecture on top of it, built around clans and kinship.
Absolutely. And this structure, it sounds somewhat hierarchical, which is a really interesting detail considering they came from societies that historically didn't operate under the Hindu caste system.
Right.
And that is that fundamental complexity you mentioned earlier. It's the result of centuries of interacting and, mixing with Aryan Indian caste cultures while still retaining their own northern tribal structure.
So what does that look like today?
Gurung society today has this distinctive dual organization. It's split into two strata, the Charjat, or 4 clans, and the Sorajat, the 16 clans.
So these groups are separated, but how? Is it about marriage?
Yes, they are endogamous as a whole, which means marriage generally happens within your larger Jat grouping, but not within your specific clan.
Okay, so let's focus on the Charjat, the 4 clans.
Right. They reflect 4 tribal categories that are internally exogamous, so you have to marry outside your specific Gal or Lama clan, but you are expected to marry within that overall 4-clan structure.
And the names of these 4 clans, they sound almost like a governmental cabinet or some kind of formal political structure.
They're fascinating because they seem to reflect an ancient socio-political organization that probably predates any Hindu influence. The 4 Charjat categories are 1, Gal, which means king.
King.
2, Gotain or Gande, meaning minister. 3, Lama, meaning priest. And 4, Lamishain, meaning counselor. It just suggests a highly organized, independent governance structure from way back.
And what about the Sorajat, the 16 clans?
So Sorajat is the inclusive term for all the other clans. And while it literally means 16 clans, the actual number of clans that are cited in research varies wildly, from 28 to almost 100.
And historically, this grouping was seen as inferior.
Yes, historically, due to that imposed hierarchy from the Hindu influence structure, they were deemed inferior. But it is vital to note that, discrimination practices between the Charjat and Sorajat are widely reported to be changing and declining in modern times.
Okay, so let's move from the clan down to the core unit, the family. Gurung family life seems incredibly central to all their cultural activities.
It is the bedrock. Traditionally, Gurungs practiced a highly valued joint and large family system.
Why was that so important?
Because that large unit provided economic security and emotional comfort. It was especially important when performing these really complex cultural and ritual activities, which often required dozens of hands all working collectively.
But that's changing now with modernization.
For sure. The trend is definitely shifting towards smaller, nuclear families today, but the bond, that family bond, remains extraordinarily strong.
I found the details about their upbringing really fascinating. It's described as incredibly affectionate and tolerant.
It is, and it's often cited in anthropological studies as a key differentiator. Infants and young children are highly, highly cherished and valued. They are rarely, if ever, struck.
And that affectionate upbringing is believed to contribute to their overall character.
Yes, it's believed to contribute to the Gurung's generally calm, unaggressive, and often humorous character. This loving environment fosters these deeply bonded families. Sons maintain a strong closeness to their mothers and great respect for their fathers, and they generally accept parental rulings on major life matters, like a career or a marriage.
They also have a very detailed relationship-based system for how they communicate, even extending to how they address non-relatives.
Oh, absolutely. The kinship terms are precise, and they're often based on birth order and sex. So, for instance, the eldest daughter might be called Nani or Thargu, and the second daughter Moili.
And this politeness extends outside the family.
It does. You use terms like grandmother, bujay, or father, abba, for non-relatives of that corresponding generation, just as a mark of respect.
And the ultimate politeness rule, which is so counterintuitive to Western norms, is that you don't refer to your spouse by name.
That's right. It's considered extremely rude. It's a social taboo to refer to one's husband or wife by their first name. You can't even use a generic word like husband or wife directly.
So how do you refer to them?
You refer to them indirectly. You use terms like the father of so-and-so or the mother of so-and-so. It emphasizes that their identity is defined by their role within the family unit and the community, not just as individuals.
That focus on the collective identity then flows directly into their marriage customs, which are traditionally family affairs, not left to chance romance.
Exactly. Marriage is viewed as far too important a social matter, affecting lineages and clan stability, to be left solely to individual passion or whim.
And the preferred marriage is a very specific type of cousin marriage.
A very specific type. It's cross-cousin marriage, meaning either a mother's brother's daughter or a father's sister's daughter. This is designed to continually strengthen pre-existing kinship ties.
But parallel cousin marriage is forbidden.
Strictly prohibited as incestuous, yes.
And the process itself isn't just a single, irreversible event, but a multi-stage affair.
It's seen as a gradual process, and in theory, it can be dissolved pretty easily in the early years if the couple genuinely cannot adapt to each other. The first stage involves rituals and a staged, almost performative entry of the bride into the groom's house.
Tell us about that staged entry. That sounds like a fascinating anecdote.
So typically, the bride will arrive in the evening, and she'll find the door to the groom's house is barred, usually by the groom's mother.
Symbolizing the barrier between the two families.
Exactly, the barrier between the lineages. And after several symbolic knocks and exchanges of words, the groom's family accepts her and blessings are given, and that marks them as married by initial Gurung custom.
So when does the marriage become truly final and formal?
That's the second formal ceremony, and that's what transfers the bride definitively from her lineage to the husband's lineage. This is where the formal payment is made to the bride's parents, often involving money, millet whiskey or raksi, and rice. It's a payment that acknowledges the loss of a daughter and reinforces the new bond between the two families.
And I imagine with modernization, laws about marriage registration are making these complex, multi-stage rituals kind of redundant in towns.
They are. Nepali law now forbids marrying more than one wife, though it sometimes still occurs with the first wife's consent. But more significantly, the required government registration of marriage, which happens early on, is making that expensive second, traditional ceremony increasingly unnecessary.
What about love marriages?
In urban centers, under the strong influence of global and Western culture, love marriages, where the choice is individual and often crosses traditional clan lines, are becoming much more common. They prioritize personal preference over the old familial strategy.
Now, let's discuss one of the most unique and, from what I understand, sadly disappearing aspects of Gurung society, the roadie system. This was essentially a community-run social club and dormitory for adolescents.
The roadie system was a genius piece of social engineering. It was a club or a gathering place for boys and girls of a similar age, typically between 14 and 17. And it functioned as this highly supervised social institution that moved young people out of the parental house during a really crucial developmental phase.
How did it work on a practical day-to-day level?
The young people involved would pool their labor during the day, so they might help a family with field work or do other collective tasks for the village. And then in the evening, they would gather at the roadie house to socialize, to sing, and to dance.
And the singing and dancing involved flirtation songs, sometimes called dubs playing songs, correct?
Yes, often in the Gurung language, though more recently they've adopted Nepali pop songs. But the important thing is that it was structured socialization. It was a safe space for courtship and developing social skills, all under the watchful eye of the community.
So it wasn't just a free-for-all. It was strictly supervised.
Oh, it had rigid supervision. The roadie was overseen by an adult, typically the mother or father of the roadie, who would sleep with them at night to ensure proper conduct.
So there was no evidence of sexual promiscuity.
Anthropological studies suggest there's no evidence of that whatsoever, precisely because the sleeping arrangements were public and supervised. Its primary function was communal work, social bonding, and character training.
So why is a system that sounds so useful? I mean, teaching teenagers how to work together, socialize, respect boundaries, why is it rapidly disappearing?
It's a real cultural loss, and it's driven by two main factors. First, the high levels of outmigration mean there are just fewer adolescents left in the villages to sustain the institution.
And the second?
The second is that villages are increasingly being penetrated by external Hindu values and town pressures, where the roadie was often subjected to criticism. It was seen as being somehow morally suspect or primitive. The community is losing a centuries-old institution that fostered cohesion and really practical skills.
Finally, in this section, let's highlight the status of Gurung women, which seems significantly higher than in many neighboring societies that have been so deeply influenced by Orthodox Hindu norms.
Gurung women hold a remarkably high status. They were and are not strictly segregated during life events like childbirth or menstruation. And crucially, there is very little obsession with female sexual purity, which distinguishes them sharply from high-caste Hindu societies. The bodies are not generally viewed as ritually polluting or dangerous.
And their power seems to be heavily rooted in the economic sphere, which must have been a necessity given the frequent absence of men in the military.
Absolutely. That necessity of the men being away for long periods created an economic vacuum that women just stepped into and mastered. They often hold the purse strings for the family, they run the farm, they hire labor for seasonal work, and they manage the sale of crops.
And they can own property.
They can, and frequently do, own property in their own right. And as widows or only daughters, they can sometimes be among the richest, most influential individuals in the entire village.
They're also integral to the ritual life of the family.
Definitely. Their role is not just economic. Women play a crucial, sometimes leading role in family rituals. For example, their blessing is absolutely necessary for their brothers during the Dashain festival, and they are essential in leading certain memorial ceremonies for the dead. Their strength, their resilience, and their adaptability are recognized as just vital to the community's survival.
Okay, so having established that social scaffolding, let's move to the foundational mortar, the spiritual landscape. And this is perhaps the most complex layer of the Gurung identity. It's this blend of incredibly ancient shamanic practices, pre-Buddhist Bon religion, and later Tibetan Buddhist influence.
It really is a fascinating mix, and when we talk about their ancient belief system, adherents themselves refer to it as Tamucho.
Tamucho. But it's sometimes called Gurung Dharma in other texts.
It is, but the Tamu community views that term as inaccurate because they don't see it as a Hindu form of Dharma at all. It is an ancient shamanistic belief system, and it's arguably one of the oldest surviving religions in all of Nepal.
And their spiritual leadership is split into three distinct, specialized categories of priesthood. Why the complexity there?
The three categories really represent different historical layers of belief that have merged over time. They didn't discard the old when the new arrived, they just incorporated the new into the existing framework.
So let's detail those three priests. Who is first?
First, we have the Pachu, or Podupayu. They're believed to be the oldest type of priest, and they descend from that ancient animistic religion from Western China.
And what's their primary function?
Their job is communicating with spirits and local deities. They are the community's spiritual diagnosticians, so you consult them for illnesses, for misfortunes, or to draw up horoscopes.
And the second category?
The Gyabri, or Klipri Lori. They are descendants of the ancient folk religion of pre-Buddhist Tibet, and their role is very distinct. They are primarily involved with funerary rituals.
They're the ones with the drums and cymbals.
Exactly. They are instantly recognizable because they play these large drums and large brass cymbals during the rites.
And there's a unique linguistic challenge associated with the Gyabri, right?
There is. Their sacred oral scriptures are called Peitan Lutan, and they recite them in this archaic Gurung language, Gurung Kura, which is so old that it's no longer readily understood by the laity today. They're basically upholding a linguistic and ritualistic relic.
And finally, the third group, the Bonpo Lamas.
That is the proper term for a Gurung Lama. They represent the influence of the pre-Buddhist Bon religion and then later forms of Tibetan Buddhism, primarily the Nyingma school.
So across all three of these groups, Pachu, Gyabri, and Bonpo Lama, they all transmit their spiritual knowledge through these sacred unwritten chants that they call Pi.
Exactly. These oral texts, are the community's encyclopedias. They contain myths, legends, historical accounts that cover everything from the creation of Earth to the detailed Gurung migration routes from Mongolia and Tibet down into Nepal. And unlike Buddhist lamas, the Pachu and Gyabri specifically practice oral literature without relying on any written text, which speaks again to their incredibly ancient roots.
So let's look at the rituals of life in ancestor veneration. Ancestor worship seems central to their main religion, which they call Kuldharma.
Kuldharma translates roughly as ancestor or clan deity worship, and it is the main religion that's practiced in the home. The ritual called Failu, or Puelu, is a major ancestral worshiping ritual, and it lasts a full 12 hours.
And this ritual reinforces the communal economy.
It does. It's held yearly, and that requires the sacrifice of a rooster, or it's held every 3 years, which requires a larger goat sacrifice. So it's this recurring economic and social obligation that binds the living and the dead.
Life rituals are also dictated by their tradition, like the birth ceremony.
Yes. When a child is born, the family enters this period of ritual untouchability, sutakalin, until the naming ceremony, or noran, is held by a lama.
And that's on a specific day depending on the gender.
Right. It occurs on the 5th or 7th day for a daughter and the 9th or 11th day for a son. It's a critical moment for integrating the child into the lineage. They also observe the chawar, which is the first haircutting for boys, and that's delayed until an auspicious day, sometimes until the boy is 5 or 6 years old.
We noted earlier that the traditional names of these ceremonies are sometimes getting confused, which must be a symptom of cultural integration.
That's the act of syncretism at work. For example, some Gurung parents are now mistakenly calling the chawar by the name Bardaband,
Which is a Brahmin rite.
which is a Brahmin Hindu rite of passage. This just demonstrates how external cultural terminology can start to overwrite the traditional names, especially in areas with high exposure to Hindi population.
Okay, let's dedicate some serious time to the spiritual centerpiece of the Gurung world, this massive non-negotiable death rite, the Pei or Argam. This has to be conducted to send the soul home.
This is arguably the single most important institution in all of Gurung society, the Pei or Argam. And it is non-negotiable because the Gurung belief system holds that the spirit must be correctly guided along this designated soul path to the land of the ancestors, which they conceive of as being over the mountains.
And if the ritual isn't done,
Then the spirit might remain earthbound, and that could cause misfortune for the living. So it is a fundamental act of releasing the deceased from their family ties.
the logistics sound just overwhelming. It lasts for days and it costs immense amounts of money.
The ceremony lasts for 3 days and 2 nights. Hundreds of relatives and friends are invited, and the lavish hospitality is mandatory. Historically, sources indicate it could cost up to 20,000 rupees, which in the 1970s was literally the cost of building a new house.
The entire cost of a house.
Yes. The logistical effort involves the entire village community and all 3 of the priesthoods working in concert.
If the ritual is that expensive, why didn't the community just outlaw it? I mean, was there ever resistance to this financial burden?
That's the economic genius of the ritual. So while the host family bears the initial enormous cost, the guests do not come empty-handed. The gifts brought by the hundreds of relatives and friends return a significant portion of that cost.
So the structure meant that the Paylava effectively functioned as a compulsory, a death tax.
A death tax, exactly. And it achieved communal wealth redistribution. Because the rich were obligated to host the biggest, most lavish ceremonies, they were effectively prevented from accumulating vast, multi-generational dynastic wealth in the village.
So the money, instead of being hoarded, was channeled back into the community.
Precisely. Through gifts, hospitality, and payments to priests and artisans, it was a potent mechanism for maintaining social equality.
What are the key ritual details involved in this elaborate 3-day event?
Yeah.
We need to paint a picture for the listener.
Okay, so the focus of the first day is the deceased's effigy, which is called a play. This is constructed from a bamboo frame, it's draped in white cloth, and it's decorated with the deceased's personal clothing and ornaments. And the Pachu and Gyabri priests, they chant, they beat drums and cymbals, and they dance for days around this central figure guiding the spirit.
And the core Gurung shamanic belief about the body's dissolution is also incorporated into the structure of the rite.
Yes, their cosmology holds that death involves the dissolution of the bodily elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And these elements are symbolically released through a very precise series of rituals. 9 distinct steps for a man and 7 for a woman, marking the different ways the spirit separates from the material world.
Tell us about the highly vivid and unusual bird ritual.
This is a powerful, powerful symbolic transfer. A claypri, a Gyabri priest, uses a string or a thread to symbolically inject the spirit of the deceased from the effigy into a bird, often a chicken.
And then what happens to the bird?
The bird is then ritually sacrificed, but only after family members symbolically pluck a few of its feathers. This action acknowledges their final tie to the spirit. Then the bird is released to carry the spirit away towards the land of the ancestors.
And then there's the dramatic climax on the second night, a staged conflict.
The ritual battle. This is a mesmerizing, highly dramatic event. A Klebra engages in this battle dance with a close relative, ideally the deceased's younger sister's husband.
What does the relative hold?
The relative holds a small branch containing a bone fragment from a sacrificed animal, and this symbolizes the dead person's last tie to the family lineage. The Klebra must triumph in this stylized combat to seize the bone, symbolizing the final, painful, but absolutely necessary release of the dead spirit from its familial bonds.
And once the spectacular ceremony is over, the spirit is sent on its way.
The priests complete the guidance, and they advise the departing soul on its critical choice, whether to reincarnate back into the human world or to remain peacefully in the land of the ancestors. They also give a strict admonishment to the soul. Do not return prematurely to worry about your worldly cares. Once the spirit is dispatched, the temporary shrine built after the burial is dismantled, and that signals the final resolution of the death.
It's remarkable how the Gurungs managed to blend their indigenous beliefs with all these outside influences. We've seen the ancient shamanism, the Bon influence, and later Buddhism and Hinduism.
Their story is one of ultimate syncretism. They preserved the remnants of the pre-Buddhist Bon religion and that even older shamanic belief system, the Tammo Cho. Then, over centuries, they gradually embraced Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the Nyingma school, which is prominent in their northern districts like Manang.
And that acceptance of diverse belief systems continues to this day.
Absolutely. The 2001 census showed that dual identity perfectly. 69.03% identified as Buddhists, while a significant 28.75% identified as Hindus.
And in practice, it's all mixed together.
In practice, it's a blend. Gurungs in eastern Nepal, like in Tirthatham, they follow the Buddha religion, but they openly incorporate many Hindu and even Kiran elements. They celebrate both Dashain and Tamu Losar, and they conduct specific Gurung worships like Kulpuja, Klandedi Puja, and Gofle Puja, Shed Puja. They are just masters of blending cultures without fully committing to any single one.
Okay, let's move to how the Gurung express their identity visually through their attire. Their traditional dress is so clearly a practical adaptation to the rugged terrain of the Himalayan foothills.
Yeah, the Gurung aesthetic is one of striking practicality blended with this rich cultural symbolism. Every single item of traditional clothing served a clear, functional purpose in a physically demanding environment, while also signaling identity, marital status, and social position.
So let's start with the traditional male attire and its simplicity for mountain movement.
Right. The centerpiece for men is the kahad, or kaz, which is a wraparound skirt. It typically reaches the thighs or the knees, and that offers maximum ease of movement, which is just essential for climbing up and down steep trails.
And what was it made of?
Originally, it was made from tough, hand-woven fabric like wool or even nettle, but today, plain white cotton is much more common.
And the upper garments.
They wear the boto, which is a short-sleeve shirt that is characteristically buttonless. Instead, it's secured with front string ties. And for warmth in the mountain climate, or just for a more formal appearance, they use the galbandi, which is a muffler wrapped securely around the neck.
Gurung women's attire is noted for its grace, its vibrant colors, and its complexity. It suggests a much deeper symbolic meaning than the men's more utilitarian dress.
It is much more layered and symbolic. The foundation is the faraya, a full-length wraparound skirt. And these skirts are often woven with these bold, multicolored patterns and secured by a sash. They pair this with a cholo, which is a fitted blouse with front ties, traditionally embroidered in dark, rich colors like maroon, black, or dark blue.
The layering seems key.
Absolutely. So over the blouse, they wear the gaelic, and that's a diagonally slung decorative cloth worn from the left shoulder down to the waist. This adds color and formality. Modern versions of the Gaelic are often seen in printed, velvet, or embroidered forms, which shows how the aesthetic adapts while the basic structure remains. They also use a cremeux, which is a shawl or a headscarf.
And the sash, the patuka, for the women, is far more than just something to keep the skirt tied, right? It's a piece of functional equipment.
It is a critical piece of labor equipment. The faggy or batuka is typically blue, and it's significantly longer than the men's version. Beyond just fastening the faraya, it is wrapped tightly to provide crucial back support.
Because they're doing so much heavy farm labor.
Exactly. You have to remember, Gurung women are carrying immense loads of grass, firewood, or rice on their backs, and that long, tight sash is absolutely essential for preventing injury.
And they also have one unique piece that adds a specific detail to the back of the dress.
The tikis. Right. This is a black, square cloth that's folded diagonally and worn between the faraya and the patuka. And one corner hangs down below the back of the knees, creating this very specific and recognizable silhouette.
Ornamentation seems central to the female aesthetic, using valuable materials.
Jewelry is an essential component, and it often serves as a family's portable wealth. They utilize gold, silver, coral, beads, and precious gemstones. Older women commonly wear piru necklaces, which are crafted from large gemstones and gold. You'll also see tilari necklaces, bangles, earrings, nose rings, and surbandi, or head ornaments.
And the most symbolic item seems to be the red bangles worn by married women, which are directly tied to the life of their husband.
That practice just encapsulates the intensity of the marital bond. Married women wear red glass or plastic bangles, and the rule is rigid. If any of these break, they must be immediately thrown away and replaced.
Why is that?
The superstition holds that continuing to wear a broken bangle risks the husband's life. And the ultimate symbol of mourning is that all her remaining bangles are dramatically broken upon the husband's death, symbolizing the end of that chapter of her life.
So how is this beautiful, complex, functional attire being maintained by the new generation, especially as Gurungs move into urban centers globally?
Well, the relationship with traditional dress is dynamic. While, Western fashion is prevalent for daily wear, younger Gurungs, particularly those in the diaspora in places like New York, London, or Hong Kong, are actively embracing their heritage as a real mark of cultural pride.
That sounds like a powerful example of cultural resilience.
It is, and organizations like Tamu Pariwar New York are really key to nurturing this. Traditional attire is proudly worn during major cultural events like Tamu Losar, which is the Gurung New Year, celebrated in December or January.
But there's also a fusion trend.
That's what's so exciting. They're creatively blending modern garments with traditional fabrics or incorporating design elements. It's a way for the new generation to express their cultural pride and identity contemporaneously without sacrificing style.
Okay, we have to now address the engine that has fueled the Gurung's global spread and their economic stability. The martial tradition, which created the famous Gorkha legacy.
This history is long and it's distinguished, and it dates all the way back to the early 19th century.
It begins with the Treaty of Sugali in 1816.
Exactly, following the Anglo-Nepalese War. The British were so impressed by the Nepalese hill fighters that they began recruiting them into what became the Gorkha regiments, and Gurungs have served extensively in the British and Indian armies, as well as the Singapore police force and the Bruneian army.
Their reputation for courage and valor is, it's legendary. They earned high accolades during both world wars.
Their service in World War I and World War II just solidified their reputation for exceptional bravery, discipline, and steadfast commitment. They received the highest military awards, including multiple Victoria Crosses.
We have to remember names like Kulbir Thapa.
Yes, who was the first Gurkha recipient of the Victoria Cross in 1915, and Gajegal, who received his VC during World War II for extraordinary gallantry. This legacy is a source of immense community pride.
And that military path even changed international policy regarding immigration, which directly influenced the global diaspora we discussed earlier.
That's a crucial modern context. So soldiers serving in the Bruneian army and Singapore police force, they typically have to return to Nepal upon retirement. However, due to a lot of political and social pressure, the British government updated the original 1816 policy in 1999.
And that finally allowed Gurkha British Army retirees to settle in the UK.
To settle permanently with their families in the United Kingdom. And that policy change directly led to the establishment of that large 75,000-strong community in the UK.
But before military service became the main anchor, what was the traditional economy based on?
Their early life was semi-nomadic, and it was deeply rooted in the high mountains. They focused on herding sheep and yaks, they engaged in the salt trade with Tibet, which was a vital regional exchange hunting, and practicing swidden agriculture, a shifting cultivation method. They were true highlanders.
When did that shift begin?
The economic change occurred as they gradually migrated down the hills, settling in that more temperate zone between the 3,000 and 6,000 foot levels. And this transition led to a concentration on sedentary, terraced agriculture, where they grew wet rice, maize, and millet.
And this came at a cost.
It did. This new focus led to a decline in large-scale animal husbandry and the abandonment of their long-distance salt trade role with Tibet.
What about the animal husbandry they retained? How important were sheep and buffaloes?
Sheep remain traditional and are key to the agricultural cycle. The practice is vertical. The flocks are moved to high alpine pastures in the summer and then brought down to the lower lands and stubble fields in the winter.
And that's to manure the fields.
Exactly. It's a critical step to manure the fields for the next crop cycle. Buffaloes are also vital, kept for milk and dung, but they are incredibly demanding. It requires women and children to collect huge loads, up to 12 kilograms of vegetation daily, just to stall feed them.
Despite all that agricultural effort, the earnings from foreign army service became the main economic foundation, creating what they call the Lahore culture.
It became the dominant economic reality. Lahore refers specifically to a soldier who serves outside Nepal. And the earnings, the salaries, and critically, the lifelong pensions raised the Gurung community definitively above that subsistence farming level.
And there are estimates for how much of the village income this supplied.
Yes, research from the 1970s focused on villages like Sak estimated that foreign army service supplied about 1/3 of the total village income.
That massive influx of money then translated directly into high social status, which is a powerful driver for young people.
The status of a Lahore is extremely high in the Gurung community. The social value is often determined by accumulated wealth and professional success abroad. This meant that a retired soldier frequently received a higher social status and more respect than, say, an educated academic or a professional working domestically in Nepal. The economic pull was just overwhelming.
How has that wealth been traditionally used, and how is its use changing now?
Historically, the funds were used to buy land and build these beautiful stone and slate houses right in the village. This reinforced the village structure, and in a way, it tied the global earnings back into the local economy.
But now there's a shift.
Now we see a fundamental geographical shift. Retirees, especially those with larger British Army pensions, are increasingly investing in land and building houses in towns, particularly a place like Pokhara.
And why the shift to urban centers?
Primarily for ease of life, access to better services, and, most importantly, to educate their children. This urban investment is the direct driving force behind the outmigration and the slow emptying of the hill villages.
And this leads us directly to the challenges of modernization, particularly the pressure on education. Education used to be seen almost exclusively as a prerequisite for the Army, but now the demands are higher.
That's right. Since 2005, the SLC Pass certificate has been a prerequisite for recruitment, and that has increased the priority placed on schooling.
Yet the community still struggles with higher education representation.
The statistics are quite telling. The dropout rate for Gurung students in higher education, for example, it was 54% at Tribhuvan University, is significantly higher compared to the 35% rate for non-Gurung students.
Why is that dropout rate so high, even when they prioritize education?
It's the strong, immediate pull of that economic engine. Preparation for Army recruitment or immediate foreign employment offers a lucrative, predictable path to financial security. The money is just too good to resist spending years pursuing an uncertain academic path in Nepal.
Why finish a 4-year degree when you can earn 50 times more salary working abroad almost immediately?
Exactly. And this outmigration and focus on foreign wages is having a painful effect on the villages themselves.
A very heavy price.
Yeah. Many traditional villages are experiencing severe economic decline, shifting from being rice surplus economies to rice deficit ones. In one area, Sak, the total grain production dropped by half in less than 2 decades.
What's causing that?
The causes are, ecological degradation, but the main driver is the economic reality that wage labor abroad pays anywhere from 3 times to 50 times more than subsistence farming in the hills. The human capital is just leaving.
And this outmigration has profound cultural costs, especially in areas where Gurungs are a minority.
This is the danger zone for identity. In areas like Iowa VDC, in Tirthatham, and eastern Nepal, the community is struggling with cultural dominance by larger groups. They often completely lose their mother tongue. They all speak Nepali, not Gurung, and they follow this cultural mix influenced by Brahmin, Chetri, and Limbu communities.
which leads to a sense of identity erosion.
A palpable and worrying sense of identity erosion, and it's something that's often discussed within the community itself.
This all culminates in the serious existential question that's facing the Tamil people today.
It is the ultimate challenge. What does it mean to be a Gurung if the culture is defined by its land, its language, and its spiritual practices, and yet they no longer practice Gurung agriculture, they stop speaking the Gurung language, and they view their traditional priests as relics of the past?
The sources articulate this fear perfectly.
They do. They fear they may merge into an amorphous mass of part hill folk, part townsmen, losing the unique identity their ancestors fought so hard to preserve all the way from Kokonor to Kola.
What an incredible journey through a complex, layered history. We started with the Gurung people, or Tamu, and dug deep into their complex identity. We traced their history not just through oral myth, but through DNA markers, confirming their ancient northern origins from the Tibetan Yi corridor, originating near Kokonor, which their legends remember as Kokoli Marsho.
We then explored their sophisticated social architecture, structured by the Sharjat and Sorajat clans, maintained by unique institutions like the communal roadie system, and we noted the high social and economic status traditionally held by Gurung women who often ran the home economy.
And we immersed ourselves in their spiritual core, the Talmud Cho, where the ancient priests, the Pachu and Gyabri, uphold the oral traditions, culminating in that massive, non-negotiable Pallava death rite, which is essential for guiding the soul and, ironically, for redistributing wealth.
Finally, we analyzed the modern economic realities, the massive influx of wealth from the Gorkha military legacy, and how that success is now, ironically, driving migration away from the villages and toward urban centers and global communities. The challenge is clear: how to transform that migrant wealth into sustainable local identity and opportunity without losing the culture in the process.
If we connect this back to you, the learner, this study really shows that identity is not a static concept cast in stone. The Gurungs are masters of adaptation, carrying their traditions and practical skills wherever they go, from the Annapurna slopes to the streets of Hong Kong or Bombay. Their enduring survival is proof of their flexibility.
But here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We established how the Gurung death rite, the Pallava, is a huge, multi-day, expensive communal ceremony that historically functioned as an effective death tax, forcing the redistribution of wealth back into the community and preventing accumulation by the elite. If the new, globally successful generation, seeking modernization and individual financial efficiency in urban areas, views such costly rituals purely as an economic burden to be abandoned, will the Gurung identity lose its vital, involuntary mechanism for communal bonding and equitable wealth sharing, thus inadvertently accelerating the very amorphous urban merger they fear? Is the cost of the ritual inextricably linked to the cohesion of the culture?